She smiled, leaning just a little closer, and said, "Don't call me old, call me experienced." In that moment, everything about her pulled me in, and I couldn't look away. After that first encounter, I couldn't stop noticing her, not in an overt way, but in the small, effortless details that seemed to define her presence. She moved through the house like she belonged to every corner, every ray of sunlight that fell across the hardwood floors, every shadow that lingered by the window. 42, long black hair falling naturally over her shoulders, lightly tanned skin, subtle freckles catching the light, and dark brown eyes that seemed to observe without judgment. Her laugh lines deepened slightly when she smiled, adding a warmth that made everything else fade into background noise. I watched her in the kitchen that morning. She was arranging mugs and pouring coffee, her movements precise but gentle, like each action was meant to be savored rather than rushed. Her blouse, soft cream with sleeves rolled up, moved with her gracefully, hinting at a curvy figure carried with effortless elegance. When our hands brushed as she passed me the sugar, it was barely noticeable, but a small, electric warmth shot through me. I caught myself holding my breath, aware of the lingering impression her touch left, light, fleeting, and yet unforgettable. She hummed softly while stirring the coffee, a tune so faint I almost doubted I heard it. But it carried a rhythm of contentment, a subtle invitation to notice her fully, to see the life she lived beyond the exterior confidence. I found myself studying the little things, how her shoulders relaxed just enough when she laughed, the way her eyes softened when she looked at my friend, the faint crease at the corner of her mouth when she smiled at me in passing. It was a quiet grace, a calm awareness that made the room feel alive and warm. We moved into the living room, where sunlight poured in through sheer curtains, bathing everything in golden light. She sank into the armchair with an ease that made it look like she belonged there more than anyone else. I sat across from her, pretending to focus on my phone, but I was acutely aware of her presence, the faint scent of jasmine lingering in the air, the subtle shine of her hair, the way her fingers rested lightly on the arm of the chair as she spoke. Her voice was soft but confident, carrying a melodic cadence that made even casual conversation feel intimate. She spoke about small, everyday things, a recipe she had tried, a funny story from her day, a memory from when my friend was younger. But it wasn't just the stories, it was the way she shared them, her expressive gestures, the light in her eyes, the quiet authority in her tone. I realized that each word, each glance, each casual brush of her hand created a subtle rhythm that I couldn't ignore. By the time I left that afternoon, I felt an unfamiliar pull, a mixture of admiration, curiosity, and a quiet awareness of something deeper. She wasn't overtly flirtatious, but her presence was magnetic. It wasn't about desire in the conventional sense yet, it was about noticing, really noticing, someone in a way that made everything else recede. And that awareness lingered long after I stepped out the door, like sunlight seared into memory, warm and impossible to ignore. It started with something small, almost accidental, a game my friend had left out on the coffee table. A casual card game, meant for a quick laugh, but when she suggested we play, the atmosphere shifted in a way I couldn't anticipate. She settled onto the sofa with the kind of effortless grace that made even the simplest movements captivating. 42, long black hair cascading over her shoulders, lightly tanned skin glowing in the soft afternoon light, subtle freckles on her nose catching the sun, and dark brown eyes that twinkled with amusement. Her blouse, pale pink and slightly fitted, emphasized her curvy yet elegant figure, and her laughter, gentle and melodic, made the room feel smaller, warmer. I hesitated at first, unsure how seriously to take her teasing. She glanced at me, raising a brow, and said lightly, "Don't think you can win just because you're young." Her words were playful, but the slight curl of her lips, the soft warmth in her eyes, hinted at a confidence that was impossible to ignore. As the game began, our hands brushed occasionally, accidental at first, then a little more deliberate. She moved close to explain a rule, and her hand lingered near mine longer than necessary, the faint warmth of her skin lingering in memory long after she pulled away. It wasn't overt, but it was intimate, the kind of gentle touch that made the heart skip without saying anything outright. Every time she laughed, her dark eyes crinkled with subtle lines, and I felt a pull I couldn't name. She wasn't teasing to provoke, it was soft, warm, inclusive. Each playful jab was layered with an energy that made me acutely aware of her presence, of her elegance, of the quiet magnetism she radiated without trying. Even when she leaned back to sip her tea, the casual grace of her movements was hypnotic, the arch of her back, the soft rise and fall of her shoulders, the way her fingers lingered on the cup. I found myself more focused on her than on the game. Every glance, every movement, every laugh was amplified in my awareness. My chest felt lighter and heavier at once, lighter because of the warmth and playfulness between us, heavier because of the unspoken tension that seemed to hum in the space around us. At one point, she reached for a card at the same time as I did. Our fingers brushed, and she looked up, her dark brown eyes meeting mine. A small, quiet laugh escaped her lips, and the room seemed to pause for a heartbeat. I caught the subtle shift, a mix of recognition and unspoken understanding. There was a connection forming, delicate but undeniable, built not on words but on these fleeting, electric moments. By the time the game ended, we were both laughing at the ridiculousness of the final scores. But beneath the humor lingered something unspoken, a slow-burn tension neither of us could fully define. She was playful, confident, and warm, and I found myself captivated not by her words alone, but by the graceful, effortless way she existed in the room. That afternoon, I left the living room with a sense of something quietly blooming, a curiosity and admiration I couldn't yet name, but that felt profound. It wasn't just attraction, it was awareness, intimacy, and the subtle thrill of being noticed by someone who carried herself with confidence, warmth, and undeniable grace. Later that afternoon, she suggested we step onto the balcony. The sun was lower now, casting long, golden streaks across the neighborhood. 42, long black hair loose over her shoulders, lightly tanned skin glowing in the sunlight, subtle freckles across her nose catching the light, and dark brown eyes soft with quiet curiosity. She leaned on the railing, one hand resting lightly on the smooth wood. She wore a soft cream blouse tucked into linen pants, her posture poised yet relaxed, curvy and graceful without seeming deliberate. I stood beside her, pretending to focus on the street below, but my attention kept drifting to her. The breeze moved a strand of her hair across her cheek, and without thinking, she tucked it behind her ear, a small, intimate gesture that made my chest tighten. There was a rhythm to the quiet, the hum of distant traffic, the soft flutter of leaves in the breeze, and the warmth of sunlight on our skin. The world beyond the balcony existed, but it felt muted compared to the small bubble of space we shared. She leaned slightly toward me as she pointed out a flowering tree across the street. "That one blooms early every year," she said softly, voice carrying that calm, melodic quality I had noticed before. I nodded, catching her words, but also catching the gentle sweep of her hand in the air, the curve of her fingers as she gestured. Everything about her presence was intentional and effortless at once, the way her shoulders relaxed, the tilt of her head, the quiet smile she gave when she noticed me looking at her. I realized I had been holding my breath in small, unnoticed intervals, when she laughed at a memory she shared, when her gaze caught mine across the railing, when the sunlight glinted off her jewelry just enough to highlight her elegance. I felt a mixture of admiration and hesitation. I wanted to step closer, but the distance between us felt sacred, like a boundary neither of us dared to cross too quickly. Her voice grew quieter as she told a story from her younger days, a mix of humor and nostalgia. I listened intently, noticing the subtle changes in her expressions, the way her eyes softened at a fond memory, the small crease that appeared between her brows when recalling a lesson learned. Her presence was magnetic, but not demanding. It drew me in gently, asking only that I notice, that I pay attention. For a long while, we simply watched the world below in companionable silence. My shoulder brushed against hers once, lightly, almost by accident, and her dark brown eyes flicked toward me. There was no embarrassment, no awkward retreat, just a small, mutual acknowledgement of connection. That brief contact sent warmth through me, a quiet confirmation that she, too, was aware of the space between us and the tension that hummed there. As the sun dipped lower, the warmth of the light softened, casting her features in a golden glow. Her subtle laugh lines, freckles, and confident posture made her seem both approachable and untouchably graceful at the same time. And I realized, as the wind carried the faint scent of jasmine from a neighbor's garden, that these quiet moments were shaping something deeper, an emotional intimacy that didn't require words, a gentle pull that neither of us wanted to name yet. That evening, when we stepped back inside, I carried the warmth of that balcony moment with me, a quiet ache of longing and curiosity that lingered long after the door closed. Later that evening, the house had quieted down. The hum of the refrigerator, the occasional creak of floorboards, and the faint clatter of a distant TV created a gentle, domestic rhythm. 42, long black hair flowing naturally, lightly tanned skin, subtle freckles across her nose, and dark brown eyes soft yet observant, she moved through the kitchen with an ease that drew my attention without effort. Her light lavender blouse and fitted beige trousers suggested comfort but also understated elegance, her posture graceful and unforced. She handed me a cup of tea across the counter. Our fingers brushed for just a moment, barely noticeable, yet it sent a warmth creeping up my arm, lingering in the quiet space between us. I realized I was acutely aware of every small movement, the curve of her shoulders, the tilt of her head as she smiled, the faint lines of laughter at the corners of her eyes. She wasn't doing anything overt, yet every gesture felt intimate, charged with an unspoken awareness. We moved to the living room, settling on the sofa across from each other. The room was bathed in warm lamplight, soft shadows creating a gentle contrast that highlighted her elegant features. I noticed the subtle curl of her fingers as she held the tea mug, the way her eyes met mine and held my gaze longer than necessary, and the small exhale she made as if inviting me into her quiet space. "I've always wondered," she began, her voice low, soft, "how someone so young sees the world differently from someone a little older." There was no judgment in her tone, only curiosity. Her eyes searched mine, calm and patient, and I felt the weight of her attention. I spoke slowly, unsure how much to reveal, but each word felt heard and cherished. The conversation flowed naturally, but beneath it was a subtle current, a quiet acknowledgement of attraction neither dared to name. At one point, she leaned slightly toward me, adjusting the blanket over her lap. Our knees brushed lightly, almost by accident, and the faint warmth of her presence pressed close. Neither of us moved away. Her hand rested near mine on the sofa arm, and for a long moment, it felt as if time had slowed. I felt an unfamiliar mix of comfort and tension, a delicious uncertainty that made every glance and gesture feel heavier, more significant. Her dark brown eyes softened as she spoke of past experiences, sharing stories that revealed vulnerability beneath her confident exterior. I found myself leaning in, captivated not only by her words but by the subtle intimacy in her manner, the quiet cadence of her voice, the gentle way her fingers traced patterns on her mug, the way her hair fell across her shoulder in a way that invited notice. The moment stretched, unspoken, charged, and suspended in domestic simplicity. I realized the depth of what I felt, admiration, fascination, and a slow, burgeoning attachment that had nothing to do with age and everything to do with presence. When our hands brushed again, it wasn't accidental, it was recognition, a silent acknowledgement that this connection, this intimacy, existed in quiet, deliberate gestures. As the lamplight flickered, casting warmth across the room, I knew the space between us had changed. It was no longer just familiarity, it was subtle, mutual understanding, a moment heavy with possibility, lingering like the faint scent of jasmine in the air, unforgettable, unspoken, and deeply stirring. After the evening's quiet moments, I found myself stepping away for a while, letting the house settle into silence. The faint hum of the refrigerator and the distant murmur of traffic outside created a calm background, yet in my mind, her presence felt loud and insistent. 42, long black hair cascading down her shoulders, lightly tanned skin with subtle freckles, and dark brown eyes that seemed to notice even what wasn't said, she lingered in my thoughts like a melody I couldn't place. Her graceful posture, the soft curve of her shoulders, the gentle way she moved through the room, all replayed vividly in my mind. I leaned against the window frame, the cool glass pressing lightly against my fingertips, and my thoughts wandered back to every fleeting touch, every casual brush of her hand, every glance that seemed longer than it should have been. When our knees touched on the sofa earlier, it was almost accidental, but not entirely. The warmth of that moment remained, a quiet pulse that refused to fade. I felt both drawn to her and painfully aware of the boundaries between us, aware that each gesture carried a weight neither of us had fully named. I reflected on the strange tension that had begun to build over these few hours. It wasn't about attraction in the shallow sense, it was about noticing her fully. Every subtle motion, every shift in expression, every faint smile or flicker of her eyes had been imprinted on my mind. Even the way sunlight had caught the faint freckles on her nose, the soft laugh lines framing her eyes when she smiled, or the delicate tilt of her head when listening, each detail made her presence feel more vivid, more real, more magnetic. I imagined her moving quietly somewhere else in the house, perhaps tidying up or sitting alone for a moment, unaware of my thoughts but entirely present in her own space. I could almost sense the faint scent of her perfume, jasmine and vanilla, lingering in the warm air, subtle but unforgettable. Her confidence and calm poise were captivating, and yet there was a softness beneath it all, a quiet vulnerability, a depth of experience that contrasted with my youthful uncertainty. The age difference between us was always in the back of my mind, a silent awareness that complicated everything. But it didn't diminish the connection, if anything, it made it richer. Her life experience, her quiet strength, the way she moved through space with ease and grace, it drew me in. I realized that what I felt wasn't impulsive desire but a slow, growing admiration, tempered by respect and curiosity. From across the hallway, I imagined her looking in my direction, catching my gaze, and perhaps noticing the same hesitation, the same careful attention. The distance between us, both literal and metaphorical, felt charged, filled with the quiet recognition of something unspoken. Every small, intimate moment we had shared replayed in my mind, magnified by the stillness of the night, leaving me both restless and captivated. By the time I turned away from the window, the tension had settled into something tender, a slow-burning anticipation that neither of us could fully name yet. The space between us was no longer empty, it was alive with possibility, quiet, and profoundly affecting. The next morning, sunlight streamed gently through the windows, painting the room in soft golden tones. 42, long black hair falling naturally over her shoulders, lightly tanned skin with subtle freckles, dark brown eyes that seemed to reflect both warmth and quiet mischief, she moved about the living room with effortless grace. Her posture remained poised, curvy yet elegant, every movement deliberate but fluid. She wore a light pastel blouse tucked into comfortable linen pants, the kind of casual elegance that made her seem both approachable and captivating at once. I lingered near the doorway, pretending to adjust my backpack, but my attention was entirely on her. The faint scent of jasmine and vanilla lingered in the air, a quiet reminder of the moments we had shared the night before. Her eyes met mine as she glanced over her shoulder, and in that brief exchange, there was a world of unspoken understanding. No words were necessary, the connection we had slowly built over these hours, touches, glances, shared laughter, spoke louder than anything she could say. She moved toward me, offering a warm, fleeting smile that reached her eyes. I stepped a little closer, careful, conscious of the delicate balance we had maintained between respect and subtle intimacy. Our hands brushed lightly as she handed me a cup of tea, a touch so gentle that it sent a quiet shiver of awareness through me. It was nonverbal, understated, yet heavy with meaning. For a few minutes, we simply stood there, sipping tea, letting the comfortable silence fill the room. The warmth of the sunlight mingled with the warmth of her presence, creating a calm, intimate atmosphere that felt suspended outside of time. Every small gesture mattered, the way she tilted her head when listening, the faint laugh lines around her eyes, the way her fingers rested near mine without fully touching. I felt a deep sense of admiration for her, not just for her beauty, which was graceful and understated, but for the life she had lived, the confidence she carried, and the subtle vulnerability she allowed me to glimpse. Eventually, she leaned back slightly, her expression soft, and offered a quiet, teasing remark about how she hoped I wasn't too tired from our little adventures of the past day. I laughed, a little embarrassed, and she tilted her head, her dark brown eyes sparkling, conveying both warmth and playful curiosity. It was a light moment, but it carried a depth, a recognition that the connection we had was real and mutual. As I finally prepared to leave, we shared a brief, lingering glance. She didn't reach out explicitly, but the warmth in her eyes, the gentle curve of her smile, and the quiet confidence in her posture said everything. It was a silent acknowledgement of understanding, of mutual respect, of admiration, and of the subtle bond that had formed. Walking out the door, I felt a mixture of gratitude and quiet longing, carrying with me the sense of a slow-burn connection that had been nurtured carefully, deliberately, and beautifully. It wasn't about rushing or crossing boundaries, it was about noticing, appreciating, and respecting each other while savoring the tension, the intimacy, and the warmth that only time and shared moments could create. By the time I reached the street, the sunlight glinting off the pavement, I knew something had shifted between us. A slow, steady connection had formed, one that was gentle, human, and unforgettable, a connection built on understanding, subtle affection, and the quiet beauty of shared presence. The moment the door opened, everything about her caught my attention. She wasn't just my friend's mom, she was presence incarnate. 42, long black hair cascading down her shoulders, lightly tanned skin, subtle freckles across her nose, and faint smile lines that hinted at years of laughter and life lived fully. She wore a simple yet elegant white blouse tucked into high-waisted jeans, her posture poised and graceful. The sunlight from the living room window hit her just right, making her dark brown eyes glint softly. I stepped inside, carrying a backpack and a vague sense of casual intent, but my gaze kept drifting to her. She tilted her head slightly, a playful smile curling her lips, and in that instant, I felt both nervous and unreasonably captivated. The faint scent of vanilla and jasmine lingered in the air, warm and inviting, almost like it had been waiting for me to notice. "Don't call me old, call me experienced," she said, voice smooth, teasing, and completely at ease. The words hung in the air, light and casual, but somehow magnetic. I laughed awkwardly, unsure how to respond. It wasn't a flirtation in the obvious sense, but there was a spark, an unspoken curiosity that made the room feel smaller, more intimate. She gestured toward the sofa, the movement effortless, graceful. When she brushed a strand of hair behind her ear, her fingers lingered for a second longer than necessary, and I felt a brief, unexpected warmth. My mind immediately registered the details, the way the light caught her subtle freckles, the faint laugh lines around her eyes, the gentle curve of her hand as it rested on the sofa arm. Every movement was casual, but it held a rhythm that felt deliberate, drawing attention without demanding it. I found myself noticing small things I hadn't before, the way she moved around the living room with confidence yet ease, how she arranged the cushions on the sofa as if the room itself were an extension of her personality, the soft hum of her voice as she greeted me. I realized I was paying attention in a way I didn't usually reserve for adults, let alone someone who was supposed to be off-limits. She laughed again, a low, musical sound that seemed to settle in the room, wrapping around me like a quiet invitation. And for a moment, I forgot why I'd come in the first place. Conversation started with casual questions, how school was, how my friend had been, but I noticed how her eyes held mine slightly longer than necessary, and how her smile seemed to convey more than words could. By the time my friend wandered in from another room, I already felt the subtle, unspoken pull of her presence, a mixture of curiosity, admiration, and something I couldn't quite name. That first impression wasn't about attraction in the obvious sense, it was about awareness, of her, of myself, of the small moments that lingered longer than they should. And in that living room, sunlight streaming in, faint perfume in the air, and her teasing words still echoing softly, I realized the day I'd thought would be ordinary had suddenly taken a turn I hadn't anticipated.